when Nico and Graham invited me, they had said something to talk about justice. And that really stuck with me, and so far no one else has talked about it, but my whole thing's about it. So we're going to go there. And can you put the first image up, Doherty? Thank you. So I'm actually going to start by talking about a different artist, because I'm not sure how much my work talks about justice, and his work talks about it a lot. So this is a Chinese artist named Ai Weiwei. If those of you who are kind of paying attention in April 2011, he went missing for 81 days. The Chinese government took him and no one knew where he was. So he's a really interesting, provocative artist who's known just as much for the provocativeness of his work as he is for, just a second, I gotta deal with this paper. There we go. And part of it is because he's such a big user of social media and he gets his message out instantly. So that's partly why we're looking at him. And so he did this interview on Q on CBC Radio with Jian Ghomeshi, and maybe some of you caught it. And I actually heard this interview a couple days before I got the email to come and speak to you tonight. And it was so thought-provoking and so poignant to hear this guy talk about how he's under constant surveillance and his privileges are being taken away, and how he's not even supposed to be talking to foreign press, and him giving this interview is actually maybe endangering any privileges he has. So next image, please. So he was one of the designers of the Bird's Nest Stadium, which you probably would have recognized from the 2008 Olympics in China. And he was all fine to do this at first, but eventually he was quoted feeling that the Olympics was China's fake smile to the world. So you can see why the Chinese government doesn't like him too much. Next one. This piece is from 2010. It was put up in Munich. And this came out of some inspiration he encountered from an earthquake that occurred in China. And many, many people died, and the government, A, weren't great at helping, and B, didn't really get the information out at all. And so him and his artistic team actually went around and canvassed all these people and found out what had happened to these people to try to tell their story. And one of the images that he was most provoked by was an empty schoolyard with kids' backpacks all over the place, just abandoned. And so this is actually made of backpacks. And in Chinese, it actually says, "She lived happily for 7 years," which was a quote from one of the mothers he met who had lost her daughter. So very poignant. Next one. This may be, it's kind of hard to see here, but this is maybe his most famous piece. This is from the Tate Modern, which is a big, huge gallery in London, England. This is the Turbine Hall, which is about 2 or 3 football fields in size. So next one. This is Ai Weiwei here, and he filled it with sunflower seeds. However, they were pretty special sunflower seeds that were actually made of porcelain, and they were hand-painted, and there were over 100 million of them. Yeah. So the interesting significance of this is that during the Cultural Revolution, but when China was under the rule of Mao Tse-tung, whenever there was propaganda images of him, there was always sunflowers in the images. And so this was talking about how Mao Tse-tung was the sun, and everyone in China was his sunflower. So they all fed off his radiance, so to speak. Next one. So here's some close-up, and if you are interested in the story, just Google it, and you'll get to see some really fantastic documentaries about him. Next one. So in 2011, in January, the Chinese government demolished his studio, which had taken 2 years to build. So you can see how this has ramped up and escalated to his disappearance. So because he's kind of obsessed with documenting his life, he documented this thing. Instead of being cowed by them ripping down his building, he said it was the greatest piece of artwork he had ever made. So he totally turned it on its head. So next image. So this is my work now. So I go, in contrast to Ai Weiwei, next image, how is what I do about justice? Next image. It's all kind of lines and abstraction and things like that. Next one. And when I was researching a bit more about Ai Weiwei so I could come and speak to you about him tonight, I came across this quote that said, "If you don't clear out your mind, if you don't speak up, then who are you?" And so rather than taking the word justice to mean kind of law, justice, good versus bad, someone should go to jail because they did this, thinking more about how do I do my ideas justice. Next image. So here's just the definition that I found online, just to give you an idea. But I'm going to talk more about the giving my own ideas justice. Next one. So this takes me back. I did my master's in fine arts in Guelph in Ontario. And so at the time I was making really large wall works. Next one. And I've always been really interested about how what we see claims meaning. So these are all works based on logos. Next image. Where I've taken the logo and riffed on it and repeated it and taken away its, you can't recognize what logo it is anymore. So I'm curious if, say, pretend these were all Nike logos. If you pile them on top of one another and you can't tell that it's a Nike logo anymore, does it still communicate something about lifestyle and fitness and all those things that we try to make it mean? Next image. This brings me to my thesis piece, actually. So this is a maquette that I made of my studio. And the yellow line around the perimeter, I kind of used like a logo. So I took it and then I turned it and I turned it and I turned it. You can see how it starts to go up the walls. Next image, there's the detail. And it's funny how you take one dimension and you turn it just a little bit and it doesn't fit in the same space anymore. It was so perfect before and you'd move it just a little bit and it doesn't fit into that room. Next one. So I actually painted my studio like this. So that little thing became a full room. So now you were in this space and you had to contend with this image all around you. Next image. And next one again. So in 2009, I moved back to the Okanagan, and of course, there being lots of nature here, about a year after I was here, I found myself starting to take pictures of clouds and going, I've been dealing with lines and abstraction for a really long time. How on earth am I going to work with clouds? Next image. How am I going to respond and do justice to clouds, the kind of light that they have, the heaviness, the quickness of it, how, next image, on a blue sky day, the sky is infinite, and when it's kind of cloudy and rainy, we could pretend the mountains of the valley aren't here anymore. How do I do that justice? Next image. So this past summer, I went to the Banff Center, which if any of you have had a chance to go to Banff, beyond it being beautiful, go to the Banff Center. It's like the best nationals art center and tons of wonderful stuff. So anyway, I was going to make clouds, but of course I got captivated by the mountains. So in this work here, I was really interested in that moment where the mountains, the light's starting to fade, and then you start to lose the detail of the mountains. And they start to become silhouettes. And so now you only have the ridge lines to tell you what mountain is. So these are all Mount Rundle, for those of you who are familiar with the mountains in Banff. And unfortunately, these images, maybe try the next image. You can kind of see, but what happened was, so I actually used the line of the ridge and kept repeating it. And again, I'm trying to figure out, okay, why is it just this one line, the edge, that tells me what this object is? So maybe if I repeat it enough times, maybe I'll understand more about how that works. Next image. The other thing that really captivated my imagination when I was in Banff was the Bow River. And mostly because of the color as I was driving in. So again, I started taking pictures of it and saying, well, what am I going to do with it? So next image, I started tracing it. Next image. And very hard to see, and tracing it. And just keep trying to trace it. Maybe if I trace it enough, I'll start to understand how it is that it's communicating to me. Next image. And how the darks and the lights, and the other thing too, how simple line work can evoke the same kind of quality of water. When I look at these, and I don't know about you guys, I do feel that sense of water. I do feel that ripplingness, and I do feel the play of light on the surface. Next image. So there's the color that I was talking about, the color of the Bow River. Next image. And, I'm a bit behind. Next image. So this is what's happening in the studio right now. Still working from water, but working from some water in the Okanagan as well. Next image. So I don't think I'm any closer to figuring out how images acquire meaning, but I'm really fascinated in the process and how my simple line work can do that. And I guess one last image. Yeah. So you can still see how there's line work, and that's how I try to bring some justice to the world. Thank you.